You know what it's like when you're writing an essay and you feel like you're totally alone with this challenge and don't know where to go with it? The way you feel navigating that essay is kind of how the narrator of The Seafarer feels as he navigates the sea. As in, what's the point of it all? And will I survive this dilemma? The earliest written version of The Seafarer exists in a manuscript from the 10th century called the Exeter Book. This book contains a collection of Anglo-Saxon poems written in Old English. In case you're uncertain of what Old English looks like, here's an example. The poem probably existed in an oral tradition before being written down in the Exeter Book. Although we don't know who originally created this poem, the most well-known translation is by Ezra Pound. Pound was a popular American poet during the modern period, which was from about the 1900s to the 1960s. If you've ever been fishing or gone on a cruise, then your experience on the water was probably much different from that of this poem's narrator. He begins by stating that he is telling a true story about his travels at sea. Before even giving the details, he emphasizes that the voyages were dangerous and he often worried for his safety. The narrator often took the nighttime watch, staying alert for rocks or cliffs the waves might toss the ship against. Imagine how difficult this would be during a time with no GPS or even electric lights. Aside from his fear, he also suffers through the cold, such cold that he feels frozen to his post. But the poem is not merely about his normal feelings at being at sea on a cold night. Despite his anxiety and physical suffering, the narrator relates that his true problem is something else. He tells how profoundly lonely he is, how he spends all his time at sea listening to birdsong instead of laughing and drinking with friends. And it's not just that. He feels he has no place back on the land. He keeps on traveling, looking for that perfect place to lay anchor. Overall, The Seafarer is a pretty somber piece, and true to that tone, it takes on some weighty themes. One theme of the poem is finding a place in life. Have you ever just wanted to get away from it all? The narrator of this poem has traveled the world to foreign lands, yet he's continually unhappy. He's jealous of wealthy people, but he comforts himself by saying that they can't take the money with them when they die. Even when he finds a nice place to stop, he eventually flees the land and people again for the lonely sea. Another theme of the poem is death and posterity. Our seafarer is constantly thinking about death. He fears for his life as the waves threaten to crash his ship. He shivers in the cold, with ice actually hanging from his clothes. The only abatement he sees to his unending travels is the end of life. He believes that the wealthy underestimate the importance of their riches in life, since they can't hold on to their riches in death. Instead, he says that the stories of your deeds that will be told after you're gone are what's important. He says that's how people achieve life after death. This is posterity. Perhaps this is why he continues to brave the sea. Finally, there is a theme of spirituality in this poem. Towards the end of the poem, the narrator also sees hope in spirituality. In addition to our deeds gaining us fame, he states they also gain us favor with God. It's possible to read the entire poem as an extended metaphor for a spiritual journey, as well as the literal journey. The Seafarer is a type of poem called an elegy. Elegies are poems that mourn or express grief about something, often death. In this poem, the narrator grieves the impermanence of life, the fact that he and everything he knows will eventually be gone. However, some scholars argue the poem is a sapiential poem, meaning a poem that imparts religious wisdom. Part of the debate stems from the fact that the end of the poem is so different from the first 100 lines. In fact, Pound and others who translated the poem left out the ending entirely, the part that turns to contemplation on an eternal afterlife. If you look at the poem in its original Old English, also called Anglo-Saxon, you can analyze the form and meter. Here's a sample. Okay, admittedly, that probably looks like gibberish to you, but within that gibberish you may have noticed that the lines don't seem to all have the same number of syllables. However, they do each have 4 stresses, which are emphasized syllables. Each line is also divided in half with a pause, which is called a caesura. Like a lot of Anglo-Saxon poetry, the Seafarer uses alliteration of the stressed syllables. This is when syllables start with the same sound. Every first stress after the caesura starts with the same letter as one of the stressed syllables before the caesura. Look at the example. You can see this alliteration in the lines. The Seafarer is an Anglo-Saxon elegy that is composed in Old English and was written down in the Exeter Book in the 10th century. It has been translated multiple times, most notably by American poet Ezra Pound. The poem deals with themes of searching for purpose, dealing with death, and spiritual journeys. It is written with a definite number of stresses and includes alliteration and a caesura in each line.